So, as Israel's war on Gaza continues, it looks like no one is safe anymore. Um, the death toll has continued to increase, and a lot of Gazians or Palestinians in Gaza have been subjected to one of the worst conditions one could ever found themselves. And you are left with the question of asking yourself, like, when is this gonna end? Like, when will all this suffering end? Because as a human, it is but sad when you see other people being subjected to conditions like this. So there is this article that came out a few days ago that mentioned that due to the continuous bombardment of Gaza and also the ground invasion, the Israelis' defense forces have mistakenly killed their own people, have killed three of the hostages who were held by Hamas. So let's go through this article to really understand what went wrong and what we can learn from this. Even before we get there, let me just make this one small point. You know, Israel has always said that, I mean, their authorities have always said that they are struggling, they are doing their best to get all the hostages out, that the people are the first priority. They have always said that. But if you look at what they've done so far, that goes contrary to what they have been saying. Because if they are really looking after the hostages, right, if their first priority is to get all the hostages back home, they would not have started with this heavy bombardment of Gaza. They would not have started with that. And like I said before, I understand why they might have did that. I understand why some of the hardliners might have thought bombardment of Gaza was the best way to go because it's gonna show strength. It's gonna like create a detour for other groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen not to attack Israel. But if that was the case, or if that is their reason for doing that, they should have just said so, you know, like we are not gonna be thinking about the hostages. All what we are going to do is to prove to Hamas that they made a terrible mistake and they are gonna suffer the consequences. You know, just make it plain, right? So that everyone understand where you are going and what your objectives are, rather than saying you are out there to look out for the people, that your first priority or your first order of the day is to get the hostages back home safely. And at the same time, you are heavily bombing Gaza. Those two things, I don't know how they fit with each other, but let's see what happened. So the headline reads, Israeli army says it mistakenly killed three captives held in Gaza. Yeah, that three of the hostages who were being held in Gaza by Hamas were killed by the Israelis' defense forces. The captives were killed during combat with Palestinian fighters after they were erroneously identified as a threat. The Israeli army has killed three captives held by Palestinian armed groups in Gaza after mistakenly identifying them as a threat, according to Israeli military officials. The military said on Friday that the captives were killed during combat with Palestinian groups in Gaza and expressed its condolences to the families while saying there would be full transparency in the investigation into the incident, which is under review. During combat in Shujaya, the Israeli army mistakenly identified three Israeli hostages as a threat. As a result, the troops fired towards them and they were killed, the army said in a statement. The Israeli army began reviewing the incident immediately. Immediate lessons from the event have been learned, which have been passed on to all Israeli army troops in the field. It added, expressing deep remorse over the tragic incident. The hostages were identified as three young men who had been adopted from Israeli communities during the Hamas attack on October 7. So that is the story coming from Israel about the death of three Israelis hostages who were killed by the Israeli Defense Forces. Like we've all said on this show, right? Like we've said a couple of times that the way Israel is going about their war in Gaza is something that we should be all worried about, we should be all concerned about, because there are going to be a lot of casualties, not just the Palestinians who live in Gaza, but also the hostages who are still being held by Hamas. If you remember clearly, there are still about 130 hostages that were being held by Hamas. And Israel does not know where these hostages are being held. So if Israel just kept on bombing Gaza or flooding Gaza tunnels with seawater or indiscriminately attacking cities in Gaza, how are they sure that they will not kill their own citizens? How are they sure that those hostages who have been through a lot, who were forcefully removed from Israel, who were adopted by Hamas, who we do not know what they have gone through in the hands of Hamas? Maybe they might have been tortured. They might have been subjected to horrific conditions. And at the end of the day, end up being killed by Israel. So I think that Israel should look for another way of solving this issue. If you ask me honestly, I would say that Israel has made enough statement on this whole war against Hamas. Like Israel has sent a far more larger message to Hamas. The number of destruction in Gaza should clearly say that. I do not know how many Hamas fighters have been killed. I do not know how many, like among the 20,000 people who have died so far in Gaza, plus or minus, how many are actually Hamas fighters. But I think only the death toll alone would make anyone think or reconsider their approach all over. But you guys out there, when you hear of story like this, when you hear the story of these three captives who were killed by their own military, what is your take? And are you sure that among the 130 hostages being held by Hamas, only 3 have been killed so far? And also 1,200 Israelis who died on the 7th of October. All those people, all those victims were killed by Hamas? Or maybe some of them might have been caught in crossfire when Israel was fighting the terrorists in Israel. Let us know in the comment section below, because like always, we love hearing what you have to say.